The ridge looked solid from a distance. From the valley floor, it rose in a clean, jagged line. Pale limestone fractured into slabs and steps that caught the sun and reflected it sharply. To anything watching from below, it appeared stable, permanent, a structure shaped slowly and now finished. Up close, it was unfinished. The Ibex reached the lower edge of the ridge just after first light. Cold still held the rock, tightening cracks and seams that would loosen later in the day. Frost clung to shaded faces, turning small ledges slick and unreliable. He stopped and lifted his head. The wind moved steadily across the slope, flowing upslope now as the sun warmed the valley. It carried little scent. Stone gave nothing back, but it told him how exposed the ridge would be once he committed to it. The Ibex was alone, not isolated, simply separated. Others fed lower down where grass still clung to shelves and pockets of soil. This ridge offered nothing to eat. It offered passage, and sometimes passage mattered more. He stepped onto the first incline. His hooves found purchase immediately, edges gripping into microfractures invisible to anything without his anatomy. Each hoof landed with precision, weight distributed not downward, but inward, toward the rock itself. This was not climbing. It was placement. The ridge angled upward sharply now, narrowing as it rose. Broken stones lay scattered across it, some anchored, some waiting. The Ibex read them by colour and sound. Pale stone rang differently under pressure than darker, weathered fragments. He tested one with a gentle tap. It shifted. He avoided it without hesitation. There was no alarm in the movement, no startle. The mountain did not surprise him yet. It only required attention. The air thinned slightly as he gained height. Breath came a fraction faster, but rhythm remained steady. His body was built for this. Lungs deep, heart efficient, muscles tuned for balance rather than force. Halfway up the ridge, the stone changed character. Large slabs gave way to smaller, stacked fragments where freeze and thaw had worked deeply into the structure. Here, the ridge no longer felt like a spine. It felt like debris held together by angle alone. The Ibex slowed. Not because he doubted himself, because the ground began to doubt itself. He angled his body closer to the slope, lowering his centre of gravity, tail tight against his hindquarters. Each step became smaller, each placement more deliberate. Below him, nothing moved. Above him, nothing waited. This was the danger of broken ground. Not height, not fall, but indifference. The mountain would not adjust. It would not warn. It would simply release what no longer held. A stone shifted under his forehoof. Just slightly. Enough. The sound was dry and final. A click followed by a faint slide as a fragment dislodged and slipped down slope, accelerating instantly into silence. The Ibex froze. All four hooves pressed evenly into the ridge. Weight redistributed without visible movement. Muscles locked, then softened just enough to absorb vibration travelling back through the rock. He waited. More stones followed, not from his position, but from below, pulled loose by the first movement. A small cascade formed briefly, rattling downward until it dispersed into nothing. The ridge settled again. For now. The Ibex lifted his head and looked upward. The remaining climb was shorter, but narrower. The margin for correction had thinned. One more release like the last, closer to his line, would leave no alternative route. He did not retreat. Retreat on broken ground cost more than advance. Turning required shifting weight sideways, the most dangerous movement of all. He moved on. Not faster, not slower. Exactly as fast as the ridge allowed. The stones held under his next step, then the next. But the mountain no longer felt solid. It felt conditional. And the Ibex climbed with the understanding that here, balance was not a skill. It was an agreement that could be broken without warning. The ridge failed without announcement. There was no crack loud enough to warn, no visible fracture spreading across the surface. The change came as a loss of resistance, a subtle absence where pressure should have been returned. The Ibex felt it through his forelegs. A slab beneath his left hoof shifted inward, not downward, rotating slightly as its anchoring stones loosened at once. The movement was small, but it altered the angle of support just enough to matter. He reacted instantly, not by jumping. Jumping on broken ground multiplied error. Instead, he shifted his weight backward and inward, transferring load to his hind legs while lowering his chest closer to the slope. His hooves flexed, edges biting hard into whatever structure still held. The slab continued to move. It slid a few centimeters, then fractured, breaking into smaller pieces that lost cohesion immediately. Stone fell away beneath him, accelerating downslope in a rattling cascade that grew louder as it collected debris. The Ibex stayed where he was. Every instinct warned against stillness, but movement would have required placing weight onto unknown ground. Holding position, however precarious, preserved information. He could feel what remained solid. He could feel what did not. The cascade passed. Fragments bounced and struck lower shelves, splitting again, then vanished out of sight. The sound echoed briefly against the face of the ridge before thinning into nothing. The mountain quieted. The Ibex waited longer than seemed necessary. Vibration travelled slowly through stacked stone. Secondary failures followed primary ones. Waiting allowed the ridge to finish adjusting without his involvement. When nothing else moved, he tested his next option. He lifted his right forehoof by a fraction, placing it higher and slightly left onto a darker stone that rang deeper under pressure. The sound was reassuring, not loud, but dense, absorbed rather than reflected. He shifted weight onto it gradually. It held. His left forehoof followed, repositioned to a narrow ledge barely wider than the hoof itself. He did not look down. Depth was irrelevant now. Only contact mattered. The route he had been following no longer existed. The slab that had supported it lay scattered below, redistributed into unusable fragments. Returning the same way would require stepping across loose debris that no longer had structure. The ridge had closed behind him. Ahead, the crest lay close, less than 10 body lengths, but the ground between was worse than what had failed. Smaller stones lay stacked at shallow angles, held in place by friction alone. The Ibex assessed without pause. Crossing directly upward risked triggering another release beneath his forelegs. Traversing sideways along the slope risked lateral slip, the most dangerous direction of all. He chose neither. He climbed diagonally upward, angling slightly inward toward the ridge spine where stone layers compressed more tightly. It was slower, more demanding, but it reduced the chance of undercutting the slope. Each step was placed, tested, weighted, and only then trusted. Twice, stones shifted beneath him. Each time, he adjusted immediately, redistributing weight before movement became collapse. Small fragments fell away. Larger ones stayed. Breath came faster now, not from exertion alone, but from sustained tension. His muscles remained loaded continuously, never fully releasing. Fatigue built not in legs, but in attention. The crest reached him suddenly, not as relief, as change. The ridge flattened just enough to allow his body to level, center of gravity rising back toward neutral. He stepped onto the narrow top and stood still, head low, sides heaving. Below him, the slope lay broken. Fresh scars marked where stone had given way, pale against older weathered rock. His route up was now visibly fragmented, a line of disruption leading to nowhere. The Ibex did not linger. Ridges were not destinations. They were transitions. Wind struck him fully now, no longer broken by slope. It carried cold and emptiness, offering no information except exposure. Standing here too long invited nothing. He turned and began to move along the crest. The climb had not ended. It had only removed the option of going back. The ridge offered no width. It ran forward as a thin, uneven line of stone, sometimes no wider than the Ibex's shoulders, sometimes breaking into short platforms that ended abruptly on either side. Wind moved freely across it, pressing against his flanks and lifting loose hair along his spine. He followed the crest. Not because it was safe, but because it was the only surface that still behaved predictably. On either side, slopes fell away at angles that promised nothing but acceleration if balance failed. The Ibex kept his head low. Looking outward served no purpose here. Distance did not change outcome. What mattered lay directly beneath each hoof: texture, temperature, resistance. Stone along the crest was older, weathered, layered more tightly than the debris below. It had been exposed longer, stripped of loose fragments by years of wind and freeze. This was not stable ground in absolute terms, but it was honest. Honesty mattered. He paused at a slight rise where the crest narrowed further, pinching into a broken spine of rock no longer flat enough to stand comfortably. The wind struck harder here, forcing him to lean into it to remain aligned. Below him, on the leeward side, a shallow chute dropped steeply toward a shelf that might have offered a way down, if it could be reached without triggering collapse above it. The Ibex studied it, not visually alone. He tested the crest with a careful stamp, feeling vibration travel outward and downward. The stone answered with a dull, contained response. No secondary movement followed. He shifted one hoof toward the chute's edge. The response changed immediately. The stone beneath him transmitted a sharper, hollow tone, a sign of separation beneath the surface. The chute was not a path. It was a release waiting to happen. He withdrew the hoof. The choice narrowed further. Forward along the crest meant continued exposure, continued effort, and no guarantee of descent. But it preserved structure. Downward movement now risked converting gravity into failure. He moved forward. Step by step, he advanced along the ridge, adjusting posture constantly to counter wind and uneven stone. His muscles trembled slightly under sustained load. Not from weakness, but from precision held too long without rest. Time stretched. Minutes passed without change. Then more. The ridge curved subtly, altering wind direction and shadow. Sun struck his left side now, warming rock just enough to loosen frost in microfractures. That warmth was not relief. It was warning. Stone that warmed could move. The Ibex slowed further. He sought shade where possible, choosing placements that kept his hooves on cooler, darker rock. Progress became incremental, a body length, then pause, another half length, then stillness. At last, the crest widened. Not enough to relax, enough to consider. Ahead, the ridge dipped slightly and broadened into a saddle where accumulated debris had compacted over time. Beyond it, the mountain fell away more gently, broken into stepped terraces where descent might be possible without committing to a single, irreversible line. The Ibex stopped and lowered his head. Breath came deep and steady now, drawn in through flared nostrils, expelled slowly. His heart rate eased, but attention did not. He had reached a place of decision. Behind him lay collapse. Above him lay nothing. Ahead lay descent, not safe, not simple, but possible. He stepped forward into the saddle. The stone held. The mountain did not give way again. Not yet. And the Ibex, having crossed the narrowest line without being corrected by gravity, prepared to do what would cost more than the climb itself, to go down where every mistake would be amplified, and where the mountain, having already taken one route away, would offer no second warning. The descent began without momentum. The Ibex did not step forward immediately after reaching the saddle. He stood still long enough for the ridge behind him to fade from immediate concern. Climbing demanded force. Going down demanded restraint. The terraces below looked manageable from above. They always did. Stone shelves stepped downward in uneven intervals, broken by narrow couloirs filled with compacted debris. From this angle, the slope suggested options, places to pause, angles that might accept weight without protest. The mountain rarely honoured such suggestions. The Ibex lowered his head and placed his forehoof onto the first step. The stone answered with a muted resistance, not solid, not loose, suspended. He shifted only part of his weight onto it, waiting for response. Nothing moved. He followed with the second forehoof, then carefully brought his hind legs forward, keeping his center of gravity uphill, never allowing momentum to lean downward. This was slower than the climb. Each movement required undoing balance before establishing it again. Small stones rolled under his hooves and dropped away immediately, clattering down the slope and vanishing into distance. He did not react to the sound. Falling stone was expected. What mattered was whether larger pieces followed. They did not. For now. As he moved lower, the stone changed again. Terraces gave way to slanted plates angled outward, polished by weather and old movement. Frost lingered in their shaded seams, slick but shallow. The Ibex avoided those edges, choosing darker rock where sunlight had warmed surface irregularities just enough to create grip. Muscles burned differently now, not from exertion, but from constant braking. His legs resisted gravity at every step, absorbing force that climbing had distributed upward. Attention narrowed further, excluding everything beyond hoof and stone. Halfway down, the wind eased. The mountain sheltered him briefly, and with the silence came sound from below, the distant call of another ibex somewhere on a lower shelf, faint but familiar. It did not change his movement. It did not draw him downward faster. Sound did not shorten distance, only correct placement did. One terrace ended abruptly. Below it lay a short drop, not a fall, but a step too high to walk down cleanly. The ibex studied it, then shifted sideways, moving laterally along the terrace until he found a slanted spur that bridged the gap at an angle. He descended it diagonally, hooves scraping once, then finding purchase again. A stone loosened beneath his hind leg. It slid, just slightly, enough to pull his weight outward. The ibex reacted instantly, driving weight back uphill, forelegs locking as his hindquarters slipped a few centimeters before stopping. The stone continued on without him, accelerating downward until it shattered far below. He held position. Breathing slowed. Nothing else moved. The mountain accepted the correction. He resumed. The final stretch flattened gradually, transitioning from broken stone into soil and sparse grass clinging to the slope. The ground softened, absorbing sound and weight. Risk shifted again, from collapse to concealment, from edge to footing. The ibex stepped onto it and stopped. Behind him, the ridge rose sharp and indifferent, its broken line marking where options had narrowed to one. From below, it would look unchanged, another piece of mountain that had always been there. The ibex did not look back for long. He turned and moved downslope toward lower ground where feeding and rest waited, carrying no sign of what the ridge had taken from him or how close it had come to taking more. The stones above settled. The scars would weather. Snow would come later, hiding what had failed and what had held. And the ridge would remain what it always was, not dangerous, not safe, but exact. It did not punish mistakes, it simply did not correct them. The ibex had passed through that truth once. He would not hurry to test it again.